There we go. All right, well, we didn't need to say that part anyway. So these are terms we see all the time with construction, right? And I think it's really important that, would you say this correctly represents kind of the spectrum of green building terms that we talk about?
Yeah.
None of these meet the greatest energy usage when we talk about remodeling or building projects, which is embodied carbon. Next slide. So first of all, to understand embodied carbon, and I will define it in a minute in case you don't understand it, we really have to think about the entire life cycle of a building. And that entire life cycle means from extraction of materials, so digging into the ground to pull out metals or chopping down trees, to manufacturing, to the actual construction process, which, look at this. I mean, this is a tiny little section of this entire circle, right? The actual construction, yet we pay almost zero attention to this, and we pay all of our attention to really what falls not even on this graph, which is the operation of the buildings. Next slide. So if we look at this in a timeline, we see that we have the materials that go into these buildings, then we have the construction, and then we have this long phase where we spend all of our attention, right? That's all the operational aspect. This is use and maintaining and repair and replacement and energy and water usage, right? And then we think about end of life, so demoing the building, and then, what happens beyond the demo. So once we demo the building, do the materials go into a landfill or do they get recycled and reused? Next slide. And this is that same slide, but in vertical lines. And really what I want to focus your attention on is this section right here and this section right here. So energy and water use does not start when we're operating the building. It does not start when the people move in. It starts when we're manufacturing materials. A tremendous amount of water and energy use goes into harvesting materials and cutting up wood and finding copper in the ground and smelting it and everything else. So when we think about cradle to cradle and cradle to gate, so cradle to gate is the manufacturing side of building materials, okay? Cradle to grave means we manufacture the materials to when we dispose of the materials, right? And I think probably a lot of you have heard of cradle to cradle, which means we manufacture the materials, we use them for construction, we use them for operation, then we recycle them and we start again, okay? That's crucial because if we go cradle to grave versus cradle to cradle, we're saving all of those materials and we're not throwing them in a landfill, right? So next slide. So what is operational carbon? Well, it's space heating and cooling and ventilation and water heating and lighting and plug loads and other equipment, the operation of the building. We're pretty much familiar with that, right? Next slide. Okay, when we look at the energy used in buildings versus the energy used in construction, this is the entire energy. It's roughly put as carbon dioxide production, right? When we measure that. And we see that 20% of building operations, that's much, much larger than the building materials, 8%, right? Make sense? It's 2.5 times larger. Now think about this. Less than 1% of the buildings that we have are being built or rebuilt per year. So 2.5 times more, but it's only less than 1%. So think about that impact, right? We're talking 50, 60 times the embodied carbon, the amount of energy that goes into producing those materials, as opposed to the operational carbon, the amount of energy that goes into using those buildings through their operational life. Next slide. And this kind of shows it, right? Building materials is dramatically more impactful on a building than building operations, right? And this is a not very energy efficient building, right? Next slide. So embodied carbon is the greenhouse gas emissions. And let's face it, as much as we like to say, well, I have a Tesla car or I have an all electric house, your manufacturing process is not working through all electric processes, right? The guys with chainsaws are not running with a DeWalt chainsaw with a big old battery on it, right? And the trucks going up and down the roads and the big landfills, the big excavators that are digging up the earth, they're all running on diesel and petroleum products, right? So manufacturing, transportation, installation, maintenance, and disposal. Notice that it's not just the front end, it's the back end. The maintenance and disposal, right? Those are all part of that embodied carbon calculation. Next slide. So what does that mean when we look at it over many, many years? So say we build a building here at year 0, and then we actually use that building. So this is the embodied carbon, of the building, the manufacture of the building, and here is the annual operational carbon. Well, it's like, oh, well, yeah, that's true, but I'm gonna build a passive house, or I'm gonna build a highly efficient, zero energy building. So maybe your energy use goes down to here, right? Now, here's something to think about. When we say, oh, I'm gonna make a super energy efficient building, how do we normally offset the energy that we do use with the energy that we would either get from petroleum or an electric or electricity utility? How are we offsetting it?
Photovoltaic.
Either PV or solar, or if you're lucky, geothermal. But geothermal takes electricity to run the pumps to get the heat out of the ground, right? So you're still using some energy. So look at this. If we think about this, first year we have this much, it's dwarfs. Second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, sixth year, right? Pretty soon, next slide. All these add up, and what we see is that embodied carbon is building here. Operational carbon continues to stack up and stack up and stack up. So on this building, 10 years after its manufacture, the embodied carbon was more. Like 14 years, now operational carbon becomes more, right? So now we know that operational carbon is impactful, but it's embodied carbon that has this huge impact, right? So how do we think about that? Next slide. So we have the embodied carbon here, operational carbon here, they're additive, right? It's not like in the previous slide where they overlap each other. This is additive, right? So we have 24% after 60 years, 24% of the energy by that building was embodied carbon and 76% of it was operational carbon. What happens if it's a high efficiency building? Next slide. It goes down, right? If it's a super high energy efficient building and we get almost no energy usage, right? It's almost zero, then this line is very, very flat. But there's a hell of a lot of embodied carbon in PV panels. Tremendous. If you go and you build this super low embodied carbon house and then you put PV panels on, you've sometimes elapsed over 20% of your embodied carbon for that building just from your PV panels. So really then it makes sense to focus on operational and embodied carbon. Okay, so next slide. So what happens if we do that? Now we reduce, and this is, I didn't make this slide, so I didn't put in the embodied carbon diminishment, but this is what, 20%, right? Like 20% is not much. We have been using a concrete mix that is 70% replacement of fly ash and coal slag, and we've been using it for 15 years. So that reduces the embodied carbon of the concrete, which is the single biggest contributor of embodied carbon, by 70%. So that reduces your embodied carbon for that whole house by 30% plus right there with that one material that we're using, right? Next slide. So what does that mean? Well, we have to think about the type of building we're using, right? What are we thinking about building? What are we thinking about replacing? The embodied carbon of a heavy steel and concrete building, the majority of embodied carbon from these houses or these buildings comes from steel and concrete. So the less steel and less concrete we have, the more efficient that building is, right? But interestingly, so we have this 80 pounds per square foot. So that's 80 pounds of carbon per square foot, right? And a wood frame is less than half, right? And where does the majority of that energy come from? Well, we see right here, it comes from concrete and wood. There's a little bit on the interiors right here, but it's majority compared to this, right? So what happens if we go to a completely reused building? We basically get rid of all the operational carbon, and now we're all the embodied carbon of the wood and the concrete, which is the majority, and now we're just to interior finishes, maybe exterior finishes, interior finishes. We've dramatically changed that calculation. Next slide. So we're gonna look at this, and how do we make sure that we're making intelligent decisions, despite whether you're building a new house or remodeling a house, right? How do we pay attention to that? Well, the 70% fly ash and coal slag mix for concrete, it costs like $5, so about 3% more per cubic yard than normal concrete, right? But it also has a cure time that's 56 days instead of 28 days. And so we buy a 3,500 pound PSI mix for our concrete, and it's at 28 days, because everybody likes to talk about 28 days. At 28 days, it's 3,500 PSI. But it actually cures to its full strength at 56 days. So it's about a 5,300 PSI mix in the end of the product. So we're getting, for basically no less money, a lot less embodied carbon, we're getting a much, much stronger building. right? So we have to pay attention to the materials that we use. And this is everywhere, guys. Like, this information is easy to find. The natural materials are going to, by their very nature, have a lot less embodied carbon, because your embodied carbon is not building those natural materials, it's just harvesting those natural materials. Yes?
You think the ultimate strength would influence the structural to design smaller footings and all the support?
Yeah. Are any structural engineers here? It kind of tells you they're really not interested in these conversations, right?
Well,
We'll bring somebody next time.
So it is. It's about paying attention
It's gotta
to
be
the
better.
long term. We have to pay attention. Who knows the difference between XPS and EPS? Of course you do. Who else knows the difference between XPS and EPS? Well, if you look at XPS, it is worse than closed cell foam for the amount of environmental damage it does. Whereas EPS, it is, what, 20 times worse for the environment? And what's the difference besides an E and an X? XPS is extruded polystyrene and EPS is expanded polystyrene. It's a different manufacturer process. They serve the same function. You can use them undergrade, you can use them as a high PSI mix. They cost about the same. I have no idea why people use this, but this is a much better product with the same functional effect, right? But then we can look at Golbat and fiberglass and et cetera, get down. Then we start talking about cellulose. So what does it mean when there's a negative embodied carbon? It means it's carbon fixing. It means it's like a tree or a plant. It's taking carbon out of the environment and putting it to a building material and fixing it. And it's the same as the wood in your house. And then you stick it in the walls and it stays there for, we hope, for 100 years, right? Those are the kind of decisions that are much, much better than we have to start thinking about. Next slide, please. So we have to use our materials effectively. We have to think about ways to reuse the materials that we have. We have to use, to a certain extent, to think about the size that we're building, right? To do a better job. Sarah Sasanka, who I read before I became a builder, had a book called The Not So Big House. And I loved it because it talks about combining spaces, combining functions into the same spaces, right? We have to think about alternative materials. 70% fly ash mix. Do you know where I got that?
Passive house book.
I wish. I got it from Caltrans.
Oh,
So Caltrans has been doing this for 25 years.
Is it for cost savings or strength?
I don't know anybody at Caltrans, but I found that they were using this mix and it's a much better mix than anything else, right? So life cycle thinking about reuse, and that's what the gentlemen here are going to be talking about today. And then lastly, we have to think about how we buy our materials. I'm a huge fan of speaking with your wallet, about buying materials from manufacturers that produce less harmful materials, that pay attention to the materials that go into there. In future talks, we're going to be talking about what is called building chemical components. So for those of you who are familiar with the Living Building Challenge, it's called the Red List. And it's not, there's not just one list called the Red List. There's lots of lists that get called a lot of different things. We're going to talk about building material sensitivities and about toxins, because they're super important and nobody's paying attention. And I'm a biochemist, and this summer, Earthbound hired a person to develop a way for us to check the building materials that we use for red list chemicals. And it was fascinating and it was terrifying of what we found and the materials that we no longer use because we know how toxic they are. And I can tell you can find them at every hardware store and every big box store and every house that is being built. And we have dramatically changed. We don't use pressure treated lumber anymore, right? Because we found better ways of building that didn't use these toxic materials. So let's make sure that we're paying attention to this. That's what this whole series is about educating us to make better choices for everything we do. All right, so I'm gonna hand it over to John Clough. John is the principal of Clough Architecture. He's actually been up here on a smaller role in previous talks, but wanted to thank him for coming up here. And John's gonna talk about kind of the higher level reasoning of this whole thing, because there's a whole lot of reasoning in this. All right?
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
All right, well, thanks, Dave. That concludes this building science portion of the talk. Just kidding. All right, so could we start on this?
Yep.
So I'm John Clough, and we work on a lot of residential projects. A lot of times we're remodeling homes. For the bulk of our projects over the last 20 years have been remodels, and we also do new homes. So next slide. All right, so on the left, new house. On the right, remodeled house. What's the difference? All right, they're both mid-century modern inspired, or mid-century modern. They both have a lot of glass. They both have slope-proof exposed beam, but the one on the left is fully compliant with all the codes that were in place at the time that that house was permitted and built. The one on the right is upgraded only in the areas where we either weakened or changed the structure or had to improve the energy envelope for the building, but it's not held to the same code compliance standards as what would be a new house, right? So the new house is going to be much better air sealed. It's going to be much better insulated. So the operational energy is going to be much lower. It'll be more comfortable. It's going to be, let's look at the next slide. I think we have, start with structural. These are the plans of the two homes. This one, you can look at the back wall of the house here. It's mostly glass. There's a sloping roof here. It's all glass across the back. No shear walls. If there was a strong earthquake, that back glass wall would fall over. We don't do that anymore, right? We didn't have to upgrade that by code when we did the project. We didn't have to because it was already all glass all the way across.
That's structural?
That's a structural change. That's right.
What?
Well, the glass is not considered structural, obviously,
No, right.
right? And so, but if you don't weaken it, you don't have to improve it. This is a flexible diaphragm structure. This is all wood construction. It's a flexible diaphragm structure. You only need to upgrade on the one line that you weaken, and you have to weaken it by 10%. And then you have to upgrade that line to fully comply with current code in terms of the shear, and specifically shear, which is the element that governs those lateral designs.
Or if you're adding another story. You're
No,
not
that's a
upgrading.
Correct. If you weaken it by 10% or you add 10% more load. Yes, correct, absolutely. However, in this one, we did end up strengthening that because we needed to support the roof and remove these posts to give it that big sliding glass door. So we did weaken the structure, and so then we did end up upgrading it for vertical loads to hold up the roof. And since we're doing that, it's a moment frame. This house,
Yeah.
there's more solid walls in every direction that are artfully placed that can be shear walls, but still allow a feeling of openness. And we use them a lot to pocket doors. So like the exterior doors and the interior doors can pocket into some of those shear walls and disappear. So it's a nice feature. But you don't see a glass wall all the way across in this home because there's no steel frames and no steel in this home. Right? There's no steel. We wanted to keep it wood, and that was not just for the reasons that Dave mentioned, which is the embodied energy or the embodied carbon, but for cost purposes because the steel is way more expensive, right? Foundation of this house is like a 15-inch deep by 12-inch spread footing, and this is an Eichler home. There were 11,000 built. They're built all over the place, even in New York, but mostly in the Bay Area, ranging from up in Marin to all the way down to San Jose and in between the East Bay too. Well, the soil is different in all those places. They didn't bother to do a geotechnical investigation. They just have the same, and the architect drew the foundation. There was no structural engineer. So, you can see it's a 5-sheet set, the old Eichler home. So anyone who does drawings for a living, a 5-sheet set is, either it's a daydream or it's a nightmare. So this house, on the other hand, right, has an engineered foundation that is, it's not on piers, it's in a flat lot, but it's a very deep structural spread footing. And this house, depending on where it's located, is going to buckle and warp and subside and so forth. This house will not. And if it does eventually start to sink into the ground, it will sink uniformly because the foundation's been designed for the soils on the site. Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit briefly about energy. So building the wall section for the new home on the left, different home, but for a new home on the left versus this is a remodel. These are 2x4s. These are 2x6s. You get more thickness of insulation in the cavity. That one over there, continuous insulation barrier on the outside of that. So the R value of that wall and the performance of it with continuous insulation barrier cuts way down on thermal bridging, much more energy efficient and comfortable inside. Also reduces possibility for moisture to condense along thermal bridges and rot the wall out from inside. This is a remodel. We're showing on this one, we insulated the walls because we opened the wall. This is only for the places where we removed the siding. We have plywood. Well, there's no plywood on the original wall. And when we remove the siding, we put this dashed line as the building wrap, right? So you can imagine for most remodel homes that are built, prior to the 1980s, that isn't there. It's just wood siding nailed to studs, no air sealing whatsoever. Dust can come in, pollen can come
Building
in,
paper.
smoke can come in. That's right. They may have had building
15-pound building.
paper overlapped, right? They lapped it.
Oh, yeah.
They might have lapped it
And
4 or
nailed
6
it.
inches.
Packed it.
Not the wrong way.
Right. So big difference. These are new double pane. In this case is a sliding gliding window, double pane glass. In this case, it's not even a thermal break for the sliding window. It wasn't required to pass the Title 24 requirements, and they wanted a sliding window, so they got this. There are, of course, plenty of options that are thermally broken that are much better, and that's what we almost always use. But you're seeing the worst one for comparison's sake. Cold, when in the original construction, of course, this would have been single pane glass, so we at least eliminated some of the coldness that creates that airflow where the air gets so cold that it sinks to the floor. And as it sinks to the floor, it pushes across the room and creates that draft, the feeling of a draft, right? Even if air is not leaking in the house. Next slide, please. So this sort of speaks for itself. The thicker and more substantial the walls are and the less holes they have for sound to go through, you can have the most soundproof window in the world. Open it 1/4 of an inch and you hear everything, right? So eliminating holes and having thicker, more substantial wall sections and double pane windows, and you can put in laminated safety glass and all these other things to cut down sound. You get a much better sound performance out of a new home than a remodel typically. There are things, of course, you can do in a remodel if it's important to you to cut down sound. You can put thicker sound reducing drywall. You can put the laminated safety glass. You can put 2 layers of windows, etc. But just by complying with code on a new home, you'll have much better sound performance than on a remodel. Next slide, please. How many hazardous materials are going to be in your home? So in a remodel, the new materials that we put in will comply with this Cal Green chart of being low VOC, low formaldehyde, much less toxic, still some toxicity in the materials, but much less. Well, the old materials didn't comply. They may still be there. There may still be lead paint. There may still be asbestos-containing materials. You may be going over some of those things, encapsulating some of those things, but like the house I was at this morning, the contractor went through and stripped off all the tile off the floor, and lo and behold, almost the whole bedroom wing of the house had 9-inch linoleum tiles underneath that he chipped and cracked and broke, and the black, you can see the black mastic used to hold those tiles down. It's all scraped from the demo work, right? That's all asbestos containing material. So all those workers had probably no idea. They're sitting there crunching asbestos tiles all day long. And now that's in the house. And of course you can remediate it, but it's in the house now.
Another $15 a square foot.
Yes. Right. In fact, if you know somebody who remediates asbestos, I'll hit you up later. Okay, so here's a question. So why would you build new? And the chance to build a custom home that suits all your program needs and all your family's needs, if you can afford that, you can get it in a new home build. You don't have to compromise, right? You don't have to work with decisions that have been made long ago by other people that may be limiting to you. Maybe you like a ceiling this tall, but your house has 8-foot ceilings and you're limited to that, right? You can be free to put the house anywhere you want on the site, which means on some sites, you're free to do it. In other if you're in a subdivision, not so much, but if you have the flexibility of a site that allows you to put the building where you like, you have the freedom to orient to south for solar orientation if you like, orient to views. You can make the house in a different location on the lot than if there's an existing home, it's already disturbed and built and dug. And we're working on a home right now that's on a hillside site. The general location of the home now is going to be the general location of the new home, because think of all the energy and effort and cost it takes to dig more of that hillside away, put in more concrete retaining walls, right, more drainage and all that and so forth. So we're limited even by the existing home on that site, but still much freer to design that house than if it was a remodel that's there. You can have any style you like. If you have a ranch house, you're going to be kind of stuck in the end with a ranch house. If you got a craftsman house, you're going to be kind of stuck in the end with a craftsman house. So, let's say you like Mediterranean style. You got a craftsman house. Well, starting over, you can have your Mediterranean style right from the beginning. So you have the freedom. Consistency is a big one for our practice. Some people will contact us and say, "I've got this house, but I love, it's a typical, rancher, but what I really love is Eichler homes. Can you just turn it into an Eichler home for me? And my budget is $500,000." And it's like, yes, we would love to do that, but we can only work on a certain portion of the house in the budget range you're talking about. And that means that in the end, you'll have a Frankenstein project where you've got a good portion of the house that hasn't been able to be upgraded, and the portion that we upgraded won't fit in, and it's not going to give you a consistent design throughout, right? Obviously, a new home can be designed consistently from the start to be uniform throughout. We talked a little bit about the quality levels in the previous conversation, but the new home typically is going to be higher quality throughout, right? It's not going to have as many places for the vermin to come in. There's some older homes, and the older you get, the more this is true. You'll never be able to seal all those areas. You may have a basement you'll never be able to address. You maybe have cracks in your foundation. Maybe you're going to have holes in the floor. You're going to have, things you'll never be able to, without gutting it down completely to the foundation, basically rebuilding it, right? Then is this still a remodel at that point? And now, if you're building a new home in California, it will be net zero energy. That's the law. Doing a remodel, that's not the case. Next slide, please. If your house looks like this, I also recommend tearing it down. These are not construction photos. These are before photos. This is what the person bought.
Oh, wow.
Right? This is the open wall, and not pictured is the wall with the vines growing into the house, inside the wall, into the room, right?
a cosmetic work.
Next slide, please. Okay, so on the other hand, why would you want to remodel? And most of our clients do. And one major reason is that almost always it's lower cost. I put a question mark there. Why did I put the question mark? Any ideas?
Once you get into
Cost
it,
per
you might
square foot.
discover lots of things.
You never know what else.
Previous one.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Surprises.
Yeah, and I think Matthew's going to talk about some of these, the potential times when cost isn't necessarily lower for a remodel, right? But by and large, it's much less. And why is that? Well, because even if you strip the house down to studs, if you have the roof in place, you've got the walls in place, you've got the foundation in place, you've jumped ahead in construction a lot of dollars and a lot of months from starting from a dirt site. The timeline for remodels is typically faster, and timeline's a complicated one. It includes the design time. So if someone comes to me with a remodel, the smaller the remodel, the quicker the design process. The bigger the remodel, a little bit slower, but still much faster than a whole new house. Why? There's a lot more parameters. So your design is going to follow, by nature, it's going to have fewer decisions, take less time. Planning approvals. If you're remodeling within the envelope of your house, I can't think of a jurisdiction that forces you to get a planning approval other than rubber stamp, right? Planning approvals can take, in the extreme case of San Francisco, years. In a normal bad case, a year. And in a great case, it can be done pretty quickly, but there won't be many opportunities for your project to be forced into design review. If you add 500 square feet, maybe you're exempt. If you don't add a second story, maybe you're exempt. You can have a lot more exemptions to design review. In the same jurisdiction, if it's a new home, design review. So that design review adds length to your approvals process. Also part of the faster timeline is going to be the time it takes to build. My experience has been that it typically takes less time to build remodels, and again, the smaller the remodel, the quicker. And I'm sure that's not always the case, but by and large, it's typically faster than a new home. The next one is reuse and recycling. And we think of, and what Dave's last slide maybe showed was the reuse building, right? Which was, they gutted out and left in place all the framing and the concrete. So when you do that, you're reusing all that concrete. There's no new embodied energy for that, or you're underpinning it in certain locations. Well, that's still way less than stripping it out and pouring a whole new mat slab, or putting in deep piers, or putting in deep perimeter footing. And the wood is reused. Most of the framing can be kept typically, right? It can be reused. And then you may also save interior elements. You may only remodel half the house and leave the bathrooms alone, for instance. You may not strip the walls. So reuse and recycling. In a remodel, we can try to be clever. We can try to take some of the worst spaces, the small rooms, the low ceiling areas, and instead of assigning those to your living space or your entertainment space or your public space, maybe they used to be those things. Well, now they're going to become, closets, bathrooms, bedrooms, and we'll make an addition to the home that contains a new living space, let's say. By doing that, we leave all the walls in place, all the framing in place as much as we possibly can, right? So that's an approach that we take to remodeling that saves a lot of material, saves a lot of energy for the environment, and also saves cost, because we're trying to leave in place as much as we possibly can. And then where you're adding, you want 12-foot ceiling, 15-foot ceiling, great. It's roughly the same. It's incremental difference versus, we'll get to it later, but if you wanted to raise the whole roof of your house, let's say. Preservation is a big one. A lot of people are cognizant of having bought a historical house, or a house that has a style, or something that is designed by a famous architect, or is culturally important. And obviously in that case, bulldozing it to rebuild is not only unpopular, but it's also kind of wasteful and of, all the design capital and the cultural value that's gone into a structure. And sentimental value is slightly the same, but also different. It can just mean, hey, grandma lived in this house and I just inherited it and she just died last year. And she really loved this bookcase thingy, and I just can't, right? I couldn't tear this house down because I'd lose the bookcase. So sentimental value exists for sure. And I put a question mark on the neighbors, right? Neighbors tend to prefer when they do whatever they want. And you just stick to inside the footprint of your house, please, and don't make any noise and have it done by Thursday. So with a remodel, that's a lot more likely to happen. Neighbors are more likely to be supportive of your project. It's also a question mark because McMansions, inappropriate styles for the neighborhood, out of context, can really tee off your neighbors, even if it's a remodel. Next slide, please. Just want to put a fine point on it. This I would call a ranch house. This is an Eichler house. People call me with these homes and say they want this. And they say, I just want the windows to go all the way up and get this big indoor-outdoor connection, and I want a post and beam look, and I want high ceilings, right? And can't you just do that, right, as a remodel? Well, and so everyone here is sort of in the building industry, and you know that obviously that's not possible. It's very common to hear that program from people. So the general public isn't necessarily aware of the fact that, if you wanted to put a new roof system on this house, the walls you can't like stretch them. And the windows, all the windows are replaced, all the framing is replaced. You're at least going down to the floor, right? But you want to walk out to grade, you're on a crawl space, your finished floor is 2 or 3 feet above grade. Well, you can't walk out to grade. Right? But even if, let's say we can put some steps, then that's okay. The new loads on the taller walls with different locations of windows, your foundation probably can't handle it. And so you're going to be either underpinning the whole foundation or, and by the time you do that much work, it's a new home. And next slide. So as examples, this home had a cracked slab right around there in this room, which I think was the dining room at the time. The slab was cracked, like offset. And I walked through it with the owners and I said, your slab is cracked, offset. That you can't save that. You can't, right? And they said, okay, but we just don't have the budget to put up a new house. We're just going to remodel what we have, but we want, from not there where the crack is, but from there over, we want to remove it, right? And from this crack city here all the way to the end of the house, kind of like the layout of it, and just make some minor changes, and just make the roof slope straight up and put in post and beam roof. You can see where this is going, right? Well, so we were limited to the kind of the layout in here, and like some rooms we had to keep that we didn't like, and overall it's a good layout because we sort of squeezed as much out as we could. But with the new home program, we could have sited this home differently, so this is not facing west. It's a major thing we could have done. And we would have had the flexibility to have different sizes of rooms and different spaces and not be sort of limited by what was already there. So the contractor shows up to do the walkthrough. He's already going to get the job. He knows he's getting the job. And he walks through, in the first walkthrough, and he says, hey, your slab is cracked. I'm not kidding. And they're like, it is? He's like, yeah, I can't build on that. He's like, really? So they tore it all down to the ground and built. I was like, let us design you the new house, for free. No, just gonna I was gonna build what I got. Thanks. So, and the next slide is yours. All right, so this is the last slide. I think we take questions at the end?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Matthew Harrigan with Timeline Design Build. And tonight I kind of want to give you guys a couple of houses that they were both successful. However, one really made a lot of sense as a remodel. The other one, in my opinion, should have been a new build. And that was something that I brought up with the client initially when I first met her. Unfortunately, in her case, she had spent 3 years with another firm designing and going through the Coastal Commission and didn't want to restart that process on her project. So I think one of the important things is really the key players on every project involved in there is going to be your homeowner, architect, engineer, and then the city. So one of the challenges that we have as building professionals is that clients have very specific ideas. They have an idea in mind. They want to go a certain direction. We want to make the sale. We want to get the project. And sometimes we get a little mousy in, okay, yeah, we'll do, we're thinking like this shouldn't be done this way, but we don't have the courage sometimes to speak up to get what's right. And so I think one of my objectives is to sort of embolden those of us in the building industry to be a little more, have a little more courage when talking to clients. It's like, that's just not going to be a good idea. That's not going to be the end result that you're hiring me to do. And for some reason, I think in residential building, we're all super, super nice. That's why we don't do commercial, because we love to make people happy. And we want everyone to be thrilled with what we did. So we sometimes cave into folks. So again, the key players, homeowner, architect, engineer in the city, and when we're designing these projects, we've got to have everybody on board. When they're sort of on the bubble, should it be a remodel, should it be a rebuild? Some of the jurisdictions, the city's going to say, hey, you're over 50%. This is a new house. This is going to be all new PG&E, all new everything. So that's going to trigger certain things. And the clients don't always understand these things. So this is something we have to be aware of. There's implications sometimes from a building perspective that the architect might reach out to the engineer and say, hey, if we do this, how much of this house do I have to rebuild? Is that going to trigger seismic, or is this just going to be a vertical analysis on this? So that we have a clear idea early on where we're going to end up going. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to cover 2 projects today. The first one is a Menlo Park remodel. What was great about this project is these folks bought this house and they just fell in love with it. They loved the existing ceilings. They're very sentimental kind of folks. They like old things. They like holding on to old things. And so from day one, we knew this was a remodel and we designed it as a remodel. So it turned out super efficient. I can show you guys the Matterport. There was quite a bit of the house that was really just update the finishes. We left, did a lot of things from the exterior because they wanted to save the interior and so forth. So it just ended up being a really successful project, and I think cost efficient. From a carbon perspective as well, the foundation was already great, so we have pictures of that. So that turned out to be a great project. Had all redwood. I think when it was built, it was probably built by a very high-end builder because the size of all the members was significantly larger than you would normally see in that vintage home. The other home was an oceanfront property, and this is a great example of how we get in trouble as builders. It was, hey, this is my beach crash pad. I surf, I shower, I hot tub, I leave. I might stay there 2 or 3 nights with friends now and then. But as things progress, and I said, well, hey, aren't you going to want to do your kitchen? No, I'm not. I don't want to do the kitchen. Are you going to do the bathroom? No, I'm not going to want to. Well, then she just wanted a balcony so that when she stayed there, she could go off the master and look over the ocean and look over Monterey Bay, which was great. But as it kept going, we kept adding more and more and more features. And so on this particular project, it probably had about 50%, maybe more, in change orders. And it really dragged on. And one of the things for homeowners they didn't realize is that if you think about when you design, the normal process of a project is you design it and then you estimate it, which is a whole big process. And then you get a change order, you do all the paperwork. And when you're building a house, that's taking away from your time to build the house. When they keep adding things in the middle of the project, it's really hard for us to get anything done, make any money, have any consistency, have a happy client. About 60% of the way through the project said, let's underground PG&E. Well, PG&E is like, I've got a 9-month project and now I have a 15-month PG&E project thrown in the middle of that. So this are the kind of things that we went through on a house that really should have been a new home. And the other thing I brought up too is I looked up on the county website. They actually have how many years of life they expect for each home on the cliff.
Really?
So they do a study of this is the amount of erosion, blah, blah, blah. So I looked up her house and I said, do you realize that they're projecting 38 years left for your home? So this is a $9 million, well, now it's a $9 million home. It's probably a $4 or $5 million home for the lot. And I said, if we built new, I could bring that house back off the cliff about 25 feet and get you another 40 years out of it. So I think that makes a lot of sense. If we're going to dump millions of dollars into a home, maybe we should get another 25 years. I mean, it's a few $100,000 per year. Pocket change.
The lender.
So anyway, I hope all that makes sense. So let's go on to my next slide. So this is our Menlo Park home here, and you can see the foundation we were able to retain. It was in great shape. This is kind of how they did it back then with the angle. So very well done. Really nice redwood, oversized joist. I mean, this is a really well built home. Let's click to the next one. So yeah, again, just more pictures. So they loved like this little gingerbread, and it drove me insane that this house cantilevered over there. My engineering brain is just no. But they loved that. They loved the little columns and so forth. And there's a wood beam ceiling up here that we saved. I can show you in a minute. Let's click to the next one. So again, kind of the same shot. This is the back of the house. So we're able to save all of this structure stayed here, all of this stayed here, and then we added kind of in the middle of the house. And when I show you the Matterport, you'll be able to see kind of how that worked. Okay, let's go. I think that's about the end. Let's click to the next one. I don't know, you want to try and do take me to the Matterport?
Your show.
Let's go. Give it a shot. This is basically where I was saying this is where we added the second floor, and this is all the new framing and reinforce this area. But I think you can turn around potentially and go into the next room. So you can see this got left there. This is what they bought the house for. We saved the built-ins. We just updated the windows for energy efficiency. We can rotate through a little bit more there. Might be able to click somewhere over here and see if you can see in the other room. So again, I was able to save the bathroom's exactly where it was, the other room. So there's a lot of spaces that really were salvageable and reusable. So let's click on to the next Matterport, which is the finished version of it. So this is the front of the house here. So you can see it kind of looks exactly from the front like it did. We added this little area over here. This is a really cute little area because there's a secret door and you go in there and it's a place for the kids to hang out and read, and nice little space so we can go on inside. And I think they did a great job of giving it that kind of vintage look that kind of tied into what it was. And so I just think it was very successful. It was very, very efficient. The only thing I wasn't happy with is I wanted that laundry room gone so bad. It's like, look at the tile and it, like, wow. And that could have been a great family room. So they didn't take that out, but pretty much everything else. If we go in the front room, You go see the ceilings there. This is a pretty incredible house too. It's like 2,000 square feet, 5 bedroom, 4 bath, and it just really doesn't feel that
Very
small.
efficient.
Yeah, I don't know. I kept remeasuring it. I'm like, there's no way it's this small. But yeah, look at the bathroom. I think just that's exactly in the. We did a little, took out a closet or something, but it's basically exactly where it was. And I think she had great taste. So this is very successful, right? I mean, it looks great. So, but I think a lot of it, what I was trying to start out in the beginning is that I had a client that was very clear on the objective, like we're going to save the house. So everything worked around that instead of a client that kind of keeps changing. Yeah, so all the beams in that room stayed, and up in the master bedroom, same kind of ceiling. I don't think we need to take the time to go up there, but I think it kind of conveys to everybody what made this successful. Okay, so let's go back to
That's original on that second floor?
Some is, if I took you back to the Matterport, I could show you, like, there's the master bedroom, the staircase and all that was all there, and I added the bedrooms and bathroom for the kids.
I have a quick question. Did the clients have a budget before you began? And did you meet that?
Well, I've never not exceeded a client's budget.
Are you sure?
They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what it costs to do it. So yeah, I think they were trying to be around. I mean, this is a long time ago. They're trying to be around 500,000. I think we were like 800 when we were all said and done. But yeah, so basically all this is the master bathroom, bedroom. This is all here, and everything to the left of the stairs is all the addition. All right, so this is the one on the ocean. I think some things have value and need to be retained. This is my project manager, Larry, who's 80 years old here and can pretty much beat anyone up a staircase or a ladder. He did finally retire because last summer he decided he was getting his motor or his trailer loaded up to his truck and decided to jump off the top of his 10-foot trailer into the bed of his truck and dislodged his butt muscle from his bone. And the surgeon said, well, at your age, we're not going to be able to reattach the muscle. And I said, Larry, he doesn't know Larry Cochran. And of course, Larry shows up at the office 4 weeks later, like nothing happened. And I'm like, aren't you supposed to be home? And he's like, yeah, for 6 months. I'm like, get home. So anyway, old things have value. So that's why Larry's in here, right? It's got a lot of value. It's got a lot of worth. So this particular project, you can see the steel moment frame there. There's a lot of steel, a lot of concrete because it has a lot of glass. Let's click to the next slide. Here's a concrete beam to take the moment frame, all the force on that. We had a whole bunch of underpinning everywhere. And so sometimes when you do these remodels, they're in a 5.5 foot deep hole all day long for weeks underpinning this stuff. Let's go to the next slide. Here's this guy's like, really? So let's go to the next slide. So this is, we had a bunch of underpinning. Now we're pouring the patio, front porch. This all had to come off. We're just kind of leaving it there. I don't know why they had it still on there, but I mean, you can see there's just tons of concrete. There's just not much we can reuse. You can see the house is way towards the ocean and not much up this way. Let's click to the next one. More underpinning. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, now this is always, you'll always love to see the crane and the PG&E lines and the palm trees and, going over the house and the neighbor's house and all. I mean, it's just, I don't know, it just didn't seem like a house that probably should have been rebuilt. But they do have a great view. It's pretty nice, right in the ocean. Again, lots of steel, lots of concrete. Okay, let's click through.
So would heel coils work in that case?
I don't think so in this case because of we're talking about a consistent grade beam to take the overturning of the moment frame. All right, this is the before, just so I'll show you guys kind of really quickly the before. So that's kind of that's what it was when we started out. And let's do a little walk through there.
What was the duration of the project?
Oh my gosh, this thing
I
was
mean, once you started.
probably- I think when we started, this was probably 15 or 18 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we just keep adding stuff all the time. It is very, very difficult
Mine was out
to
of control.
have a consistent. But yeah, we got her to take all these walls out, open up. I mean, look at how little view there was out to the ocean. So there's just not really much. So we put in a nano wall there. And if you go upstairs, you're going the right direction. Yeah, right there, that circle, you got it. You're good, Dave, right there. And then you turn left and go up the stairs. I don't know how many other people Matterport all their projects.
love
What was that? Yeah. Yeah, so we always Matterport all the construction throughout. So if you
Good blinds.
turn around, you can get over into the bathroom right there and turn around and take a look outside. So this is what triggered her to do this project. Is there's a very low
Yeah.
ceiling here, so we put in the steel moment frame to open that up to the backyard and also get her a balcony so she can go out on that space.
You do the Matterport in-house or you hire someone?
Yeah, we have a Matterport. Yeah.
Oh, in-house.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because when we've hired it out, they don't take enough points to view everything. So we just got our own camera. So this is during construction, and this you can just see. So right here, there's these wooden structures here, kind of like a wooden version of a hardy frame. Right, so that's where we had a lot of underpinning and connecting all this under here. You can see like how much new wood is really throughout the house. So let's turn around. And so this is going to be the nano wall. But what you really can't see is, and Dave knows this, house in Santa Cruz, I don't know who built these things, but it was built in the 60s. They were probably on acid when they did this. And over here, there's a corner that there was no, I don't know what was holding the house up. There were beams just ended in space, and it was a bounce house or something. There was nothing. So once we got open, we had to go and add a lot of these beams across here, all getting thread the needle between the joist. I mean, it took so long to frame this house instead of just having everything out of the way. Changed all the headers because they had all the headers down at like 6 feet for some reason, which you saw on the previous slide. So you can just see there's like tons of infilling all these little parts and pieces. We can head up to the upstairs again, please. You're really good at this, Dave.
I think the frame's more interesting than the finish.
Yeah. Especially this one. It's oh man, they had crazy floor framing. They had the joist, and then they put ledgers, and then they put little 1x4s across, so everything creaked.
Is that stair 3 feet wide?
Excuse me?
That stair 3 feet wide?
It is, yeah. Yeah, we rebuilt the stairs because it had really steep, and people kept falling. So like in here, we have the steel, and we had trusses, and basically all that had to get rebuilt because you can't just cut the truss in the middle. Once you put the steel, you have to fur everything down so that you have a nice finished looking ceiling. So this was quite a bit of work. Unfortunately, that's in the way. You can't see the view, but I think you get the idea of, for a home of this value in this location, this is definitely a house that I think should have been a new home. And also, we're kind of building a house with a very limited life. So when we talk about embodied carbon, operational carbon, every other kind of carbon, when you're putting this much time, money, and effort and materials in, with that limit of a lifespan, it just seems somewhat wasteful.
Try to finance that.
Yeah, if you're on the on the cliff, you have to be willing that you might lose that house, right? It's millions of dollars. So
Yeah, this last year.
so yeah.
There's a house in Pacifica, 26 years ago, it looked like that. The back edge of the house is hanging over the cliff.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's it. Hopefully that kind of conveyed. I think the main point I was trying to make is just when we're dealing with clients, we can't be shy. We can't be timid. I think everyone's built a house that they were like, this should have been a new build. And so I just hope I encourage everybody to have a little bit more courage out there, and let's just try and get our clients to do the right thing. Okay, that's it.
You mentioned that this was about an 18-month timeline. If you had the opportunity to rebuild it from the ground up, how long do you think the timeline would have been?
Well, I think something like this would be done in 12 months. Yeah.
You gotta do coastal commission.
I mean, well, not including design, just the build. It would have been much easier because all the stuff we're doing, we're in a hole, we're on our back, we're sliding,
Yeah.
10 guys with a beam,
Yeah.
dragging it across the floor, lifting that set. I mean, it was not easy. And then it also wasn't easy because things kept getting added
The big deal is coastal.
all the time, which made it very difficult as well. So,
You said this was in Half Moon Bay and Santa Cruz.
Say, you want
Capitola.
Monterey Bay,
setback.
looks on Monterey Bay. Did I say Half Moon Bay?
Yeah.
Oh, I meant
No.
Monterey Bay. That's
No,
the
you-
Monterey Bay there.
You said-
Opal Cliffs, surf
Yeah,
spot.
it's on Opal Cliff. Okay, I think that's it, right? Good, thank you.
I guess that's,
Health insurance.
I'm Matt Griffiths, I'm with Daily Owned Realty, so kind of giving it kind of from a real estate brokerage development perspective. My background, obviously I'm a real estate broker, work primarily with buyers at the Daily Owned firm. I'm also a general contractor, and prior to Daily Owned Realty, actually started my career actually as a CPA of all things. About 5 years at Ernst & Young out of undergrad, and then went back to grad school at Stanford and been in real estate ever since. It's what I wanted to do. So I wear a lot of hats and have a lot of fun doing what I do. I spend the majority of each day literally talking through buyers as they go through the process of what can be done, what can't be done before we actually will take the time with these wonderful, busy professionals, really kind of help kind of pre-write what the prescription is going to be, kind of get a sense of what they want. Can we do an ADU? What's the setback? What team would you use? How long would it take? Give a rough order of magnitudes, because we have to know that in order for us to know that the clients actually really want to purchase the property. Is it going to work or not? And that really becomes kind of in the placemat for what we can then turn over to the design professionals after we've made those introductions with the right, I call it the right fit team to, once you close escrow, once you move forward, you've got that as kind of a roadmap going forward. You've already done a lot of the due diligence already. So that's how I spend a lot of my time. And I wanted to approach this a couple different ways. The next slide I'll show you is probably an example of what never to do on PowerPoint. I call it word salads, and don't ever do a PowerPoint this way. But the point is not, please don't read it. Don't read it. The idea is, you see how I look at it, the word salad, it's everywhere. But look at this as a buffet. Each of these plates has about the same amount of salad on it. There's really the pros and cons, I call it considerations, because there's really no negatives here, it's just considerations. I don't think, I look at it as kind of the positive, what's negative on one of these options of remodeling versus building new is positive for something else. And you may, for instance, not, be able to do a new home because you don't have the budget, or you don't have the time, or you don't have the resources. So what this really shows you is, see how this is pretty much equal stuff on each of these quadrants. There's really no right or wrong answer here. I mean, it really is so dependent on the client, the property, programming, what the existing conditions are, and you've got to work around that. There's a few things in here I think we haven't touched on. Just to throw it out there, we could have an entire session on some of these topics, but just as a real estate professional, what I get all the time is, gee, if I do a major remodel, what's MLS gonna show? Is it gonna be a new construction or it'll still be considered old? And there are clients out there that have to buy new. They just have whatever in their mind they want new. The clients want all new. Things like tax assessments. Other question we get all the time is, gee, if I do all this, am I gonna have to get a new tax assessment? Well, there's really no good answer to that. It depends on what the county says, and whatever drawings go to the town also go to the county. The assessor makes the decision. We've had clients that do major remodels and their assessment never even went up $1. We've had clients that have had new homes, of course it goes up completely. We've had clients that do minor remodels and it goes up considerably. There's really no right, or you can't really exactly predict that, but it's something I put that on here just to kind of think about. Things like insurance and financing, those are gonna be different in these two landscapes. Financing, for instance, if you're doing a small bathroom, maybe you don't even need financing. If it's something you're gonna do out of pocket, if you're doing a new rebuild, it's a major deal. You're gonna need probably their financing involved, and even financing interest rates are higher and so forth. Other things that I look at is, do you have the wherewithal if you're building new? Something like here is like one of these is, are you able to actually live in there while you're doing it? Well, in a remodel, you could do that. We have clients that are doing everything they can to afford a $4 million house. They sure as heck don't have the money to turn around and buy a second rental or go rent just so they can do a full new tear down. They don't have the option. So even though it might on paper, and I'll get to my next point eventually, is on paper what the performance says the highest and best use is for a piece of property, building versus rebuild, it isn't always an option for everybody. So those are some of the things I think in terms of just keep in mind, things like time we've talked about already. So we can go to the next slide. So the case study, I think something, I have literally been going through this this last week on a property we had. We just sold it yesterday. But something that really struck home for me, it was kind of a feel-good case study is, and it's an unlikely place. It's in Atherton where, the value of an acre could be north of $9 million just for the dirt. But this was a property where, we had several clients over the weekend come through looking at it, and they didn't want the full maxed out property. They didn't want that. They could afford it, but didn't want it. And it can be for a number of different reasons. They, for instance, are empty nesting, and they're already going to be scared to death to live in a 14,000 square foot house. Other ones are very environmentally motivated. They don't feel right doing it. So, but they like the idea of having a piece of real estate that in the future they could fully build that out more, but they don't have to right now. And instead they kind of get the best of both worlds, that they find a nice used custom home is something that I really try to steer a lot of clients towards. You get the benefits of, it was likely built as someone's forever home. They thought about where things should go. They thought about the right connectivity of various rooms. They put the right extra features in there that only a custom person would do. And you have a really good starting point, good bones as it were to work with. So we can go, and then also in the case of also, if you can purchase an existing home and work with it, you can see the land value and the cost to rebuild is actually higher than list price. You couldn't rebuild it today for what it would cost. So we can go to the next slide. So this is an example I was thinking of. This was a home that I had, was in the open houses this weekend. It was 13 million was the active price on it. It's over an acre. If you just look at this part here, this is what the pro forma would tell you to do, is you have 1.1 acres, the FAR allowed, typically is 18% above ground. So you take the lot times 18%, you can do that above ground. Plus you get the basement, which is not included, is exempt. Plus you get an ADU, which in the Atherton can be as high as 1,200 square feet. You also get a JADU, which is a junior ADU, another 500 square feet. This is north of 14,000 square feet you could build on this if you want. But it was such a neat feeling this weekend to have client after client come through. Oh my gosh, we love it. We want a right-sized house. We don't want all this. We like that we can do it, and we're willing to pay the premium to have the piece of dirt that allows us that optionality, but we don't have, our kids are going away. I don't want to grow old in a big house, et cetera. So instead, this home was built in '93, so I wouldn't call it old. It's going to have Romex cabling. It's going to have some copper piping. It's going to have all some of the things you want that you would have today. 5,600 square feet is the biggest house my wife would ever want to live in. She'd be scared the Jesus out of herself if she had to be in a 15,000 square foot house all alone. It would scare the heck out of her. So that's a good size for many people. They had already done over $1 million in all the bluestone, the perimeter, hardscaping, all that had already been done. Again, it's a good turnkey size, and the land value of all this, the land value plus trying to rebuild that same 5,600 square feet plus a 3-car garage today at $1,000 a foot, I mean, you're well over the $13 million asking price. So, go to the next slide. So these are the problems with it, and this is kind of the stuff that I do, and going through the process. So looking at the existing site plan, that's the first floor, that's the second floor. It's got a great site plan. The trees are not in the way. You have a lot of optionality where you can do a swimming pool, where you can do other things. There was a few flaws in the floor plan, but generally I call it an 80% great room, because a lot of clients don't want the full great room because you kind of see the mess and the smells and everything else if it's too great. So it had enough connection without being too much connection. And upstairs, again, you remember I said a custom home has been customized for somebody in the past. This particular house had, a granny unit or an in-law unit. So you can't call it an ADU, but that's not what it was built for. So this is a secondary unit upstairs. It's really weird that the live-in nanny could then 24/7, while the parents are sleeping, if there's ever an emergency in the nursery, could come through both closets to get to the nursery. It makes a lot of sense for that particular seller. It wouldn't make sense for most of the free world. But these are really easy fixes. I mean, so you can actually, right now, you have a second bedroom upstairs with no bathroom. It has to use the master bathroom, or the primary bathroom, I should say. It's kind of a floor plan flaw, So it's very simple. You have these nanny units here. There's a bathroom there. There's a wet wall right here. You create a second bathroom, which piggybacks to the same wet wall. This now becomes an entire second suite upstairs, which starts to make a lot of sense. Downstairs, the family, again, it's very customized for them. They have twins, and the twins fight about clothes unless they can share them. So they wanted, this one has its own bathroom, but they had a shared closet, which is kind of hokey, but very easy to fix. Exactly. The other ideas, I mean, this is all well and good. I want to be sustainable. I want to keep what's here, minor things, minimum carbon, if you will, for the stuff you're changing here. I would like to have some additional space. That's fine. Someone else earlier, one of the speakers mentioned it, that you can actually, if you want that high ceiling, that gazebo room, the pavilion room, the whatever, the pool room, it's a perfect place for what the wonderful world calls ADUs. I love ADUs. That allows you to you're minimizing the amount of new construction only with the separate structure. You're not changing the main structure. So you're minimizing your impact by just doing the new construction impacts on the separate unit. Plenty of space for a pool. The trees are not in the way. This allows you, and the reason I said the advantages, there's a couple things for schedule, is you're staying within the existing envelope, which someone else mentioned earlier is kind of the fast track way of doing a remodel. Can be much faster because you're not asking the planning department for a lot of neighbor impacts and so forth. It's not over the counter, nothing is anymore, but it's the next best thing. And then any of the new construction, if you can call that an ADU, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's kind of a duck, meaning if it meets all these critical things of an accessory dwelling unit, the state really needs additional housing. So this can be done on a much faster track than if you were to try to rebuild this exact additional square footage, just as a typical addition to a house. So what I'm getting at is by keeping things here, they could really move into something pretty immediately. They could do this over time when they get around to it. Construction would be super easy through either one of these entrances. You can get the pool you really want without having to get someone else's pool. I love to swim, so I'd like to I just want a lap pool is all I would ever want. So it really makes a lot of sense here in terms of how they get the best of both worlds. New construction only where you need it. Live with what you already have here. Make some very simple changes and kind of have the benefits of both. Next slide. So some of the kind of takeaways here. Again, we talked about trying to leverage what you can do with existing improvements. Look for any opportunities to do that. Look for those used, if you will, custom homes. They're likely built very well and really well thought through. You kind of most of the work is being done on just the new construction element, which is minimized. You're not doing a lot to the new structure. Again, you save a lot of time. the caveats again to remember are there's really no universal right or wrong answer. Everything I just mentioned, if you're a developer trying to make money and you're trying to do a spec house, then everything I just said doesn't make sense because you need to have the basement, you gotta have the pool. It doesn't make sense really to keep a 5,600 square foot house, unfortunately, on a lot that costs us worth $9 million. So there are caveats, but I was really just kind of enlightened, uplifted when I saw this experience literally in the last week or so of someone who came in and really liked it for what it is. And I just don't get to see that very often in the work I do in Atherton. So I love Atherton. I love it. It's one of the easiest, best towns to work in. But it's hard to kind of get the sustainability bug in building there. And I think the parting shot here, it's super important, everything I just said. And I try to do this every day that I work with clients, and I try to start the process and then hand it over to the team members that'll do it. It's super important to get the team involved early on. If you don't want to do all the work today, at least pre-program as much as you can for the future. Don't throw good money after bad. Get your designer, get your architect, get your interior folks on board together to really start, just listen and start, if you can be proactive with listening to what people want, plan for the future, even if you don't need it now. It just really, I think, is going to lead to a better result for everybody in the end. So, that's it.
So I think rather than getting the table up here, we'll just have you guys ask questions of the three presenters. I think it's super important though to focus on the idea that, you know, I got into this career because I loved what we are allowed to do, but every day I'm learning something new and learning something about, you know, people and about buildings and about how Santa Cruz sucks housing. And like, yeah, if you ever buy a house in Santa Cruz, just expect to take it down. And you know, really to try to kind of continue to think about the balance between the existing house and the new house and what you have to do and really bring in the team, right? The architect is going to define how those views and those dreams of that client get put into practice, but the builders or the people who are doing the on-site work have to understand the existing structure and communicate that with the builders, because we've seen lots and lots of the insides of walls of buildings in certain areas, right? And hey, you know, I've done 5 jobs here. Every one of them, they screw up these details. The foundations are garbage, right? You know, you have a break in the foundation, right? So it's like that communication. We always have to think about talking to all of that team and getting it together. I think you're exactly right. Let's make sure that we're all communicating. I think that the whole idea of being stronger with our opinions about helping people protect themselves, right? Like, I often think about when we answer questions for clients that we're to a certain extent protecting them from themselves. Because so often, oh, I want this. Well, but this and this. Well, I don't care if there's a 4-inch lift in the middle of the floor, right? Well, you know, if you'd listened to me earlier, right? And understanding how we have to impact people is not about the facts, right? It's about heart first, get their heart, get their confidence, then the facts, right? And so, you know, I just want to make sure that we're all considering the fact that this is about influencing people and making the right decisions on what is often not a yes or no. It's exactly to your point, right? There's not an often right and a wrong. There's a right now, but then if you make 3 changes later on, it becomes maybe not so right? And the structural engineer walked in an hour late, so he missed all the structural engineering part. But anyway, anybody have any questions? Megan.
Hi. I was hoping one of you could talk about how you talk to your clients at the very beginning of a project about cost implications for like whether you should remodel or tear down. How do you talk to them about that?
Well, first thing I remind people is that it's the construction industry that sets the construction prices, not the architect. Right, that's important to remind people, and then just talk about what are they trying to accomplish with the project, and then try to drill down to what kind of quality level are they expecting, and then try to drill down to would they prefer to work with a more qualified contractor for a more predictable outcome and have
a better process throughout and probably a better result? Or is their value system more to go with the less expensive builder and kind of put in a lot of sweat equity and hope it goes well and maybe, try to save some money, but not necessarily have a great process? Or to talk about if they've done that type of work before, what their experience was. I'd like to talk about the level of finishes they're expecting in the house. So a lot of questions about that, instead of just saying construction costs X or Y or something, because it can really vary.
Matthew, how about you?
Yeah, well, it starts out with the questions the clients ask. So we met with clients yesterday and they said, if we push out in the front, how much is that going to cost? And I said, well, I don't know because I don't have any drawings or plans. Their next question was, if we push out the front and the side, how much will that cost? And I said, well, normally we spend about 40 to 60 hours estimating the things that you're asking me, so it's going to be hard for me to answer that on the spot. So what I typically do is I like to show folks, I love the Matterport before and after. It looked like this, now it looks like that. I think people can relate to the pictures quite a bit better. And you go, yeah, something like this, that's about $1.4 million right there. Is that what you're thinking? And I kind of have a rule, like if their budget is $1 million, then I figure they can go to $2 million. That's kind of, there's like the 100% rule. I don't know if anyone else noticed that, but it seems like they usually have about double, because reality at a certain point hits that we're not going to get what we want for $1 million. And usually I have to talk to several people to get to that.
Except
To that point. But if they come and they have 150,000 and it's $1.5 million, that never happens. But usually people, I think, typically about double, they just don't know. They come in and I assume they don't know. I don't take any offense. I don't have any feeling about whatever they say. It just is what it is. But it's very important. They can't get on the right foot if they don't have a right realistic budget. It's hard to be successful on your design or anything else if you don't have a realistic budget.
Don't you think though that, to address kind of the root cause of Megan, or the root problem within Megan's question, which is, and John, you said it specifically, is we don't set the prices, right? And to a certain extent, the builders, I know the builders in this room, we don't set the prices either, right? The subcontractors and the suppliers and the clients set the prices, right? Like, do you want $50,000 cabinets or do you want $20,000 cabinets? Do you want, $20 a square foot tile, or do you want glass tile that's $60 a square foot, right? Like, it's those kind of questions that's the hardest part, is to understand not only the implications, like your Opal Court, right, was a perfect job. Like, the whole scope of the job changed as the project was going through construction, which meant that they hadn't really delved into the ideas that were driving the client to make these changes in design, right? And we see it all the time. And we see jobs come into us from architects that have spent a year, 2 years in design, and then we spend another year in pre-construction and then things change. Right? And the faster we jump into construction after architecture, the more often those changes are serious and impactful in construction, right? So like, I think one of the big challenges is, first of all, talking to builders earlier, right? Because often they're not going to believe you as the architect, right? Yeah, but like, show me the money, right? Well, builders can show them the money, right? But we also have to think that we have to really find out what their it is, and have we captured that it, and have we communicated effectively enough that, I know that you want this, but this costs X numbers of dollars. And the easiest way I've seen that to do it is to get pricing, right? To get pricing from a builder, or for us, pricing from a subcontractor, right? I know you want that Savant electrical system. It's $100,000. Yeah, but that's worth it to me. Okay, then that's a conversation that we just had with the price, right? And so I think it's, architects have an incredibly difficult job in taming that beast. right? Anybody else?
To
Carlos.
Mr. De Leon.
I'm not
That-
Mr. De Leon, no, it's King De Leon, I am not Mr. De Leon.
Well,
Well, I'm
so,
flattered.
so as an architect builder, having the ability to pre-qualify people and just say, show me the money in a polite way, and then see what their scope and their desires are, like you said, it's everything. Otherwise, there's plenty of work out there. And they need to have a grasp of reality, or everybody's spinning their wheels. And if you're in a certain market, it's easier than other markets. Like presently, I'm dealing with people who have nice houses, want to add and do some things in it. And even there, I have to say, well, in a polite way, do you have the money? And otherwise, it's just a big waste of time. And at my age, I ain't wasting no more time.
How do you get the real price from clients? I mean, Matthew has the 2-to-1 ratio.
That's crazy. They say
How do you do it?
Right, so we ask
See
clients,
there?
we ask our clients if they would prefer to have us design their whole wish list and then start to, into the schematic design level, and then start to talk to contractors and find out what this thing could cost. And from there, edit it to the appropriate level. Or if they really want us to stick to that number they just said and design them a much smaller project that we think can be built for that number. And so the ones that say, well, they have to stick to the number, right? We figured that they're probably really constrained in the budget, and we need to do a project that's going to fit a smaller budget, and have to tell them that every single time that they don't have enough money to do what they want.
But
You think it's every single time?
Every single time.
But I always figured maybe the variable is 50%, They've got wiggle room they're not telling you about, right? 50% maybe, but 100%? I mean, that's common? Where you can find
In
somebody who
Africa.
says, I got $1 million budget, but really they've got a $2 million budget?
Well,
Well, it's all relative to
We don't
the
assume
price.
well, people walk in, they don't know what this costs.
They don't,
Yeah.
yeah.
So they talk to friends, which usually lowball what they spent. And then they set an initial budget. So what I'm saying is not that we're trying to double it or anything. What I'm saying is that usually if they think it's 500,000, if they're thinking a number that high, then they're ready to spend 500,000. Usually if you end up at $1 million, they still will go forward with the project
Okay,
as
because
well.
they had a lower expectation, they didn't have a reality of what they thought was.
Right, most people, nobody knows what this stuff I mean, I still, every bid, I'm like, I tell my estimator, there's no way it costs that much, and then we add it up, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, it does cost that much. I'm shocked every single estimate, but last year, in 2022, the Association of General Contractors put out a econ report, and the conglomerate, or the aggregate inflation in our industry was 24% in 2022,
Wow.
according to the AGC. So
I have one more question of this gentleman. So how frustrating was it to do the Opal Cliffs project?
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
honey.
I'm sorry. The Opal Cliffs project compared when it seems like it was just a unfolding of problem after problem. That's both rewarding and frustrating. It must have been when the people are just ignoring reality.
Well, she had the money to just keep paying.
Well, I know, but
Yeah, there's no
still,
money
you have to
shortage.
deal with it
No
as a
money
builder.
shortage, so.
But yeah, well, I think that, I inherited that project. So she had hired another firm that that did the design and got it permitted. And then she was showing me the plans, and I was like, that's really bad. I showed these guys kind of what the original plan was, and I was like, I would not build that here because it's not very well designed. And then I said, oh, you should also do your kitchen, you should also do this, you should also do that. And she said, no. But once you demolish, then all of a sudden, hey, I might live there.
Oh, yeah.
It went from that's my
Yeah.
beach crash pad to I might live there.
Yeah.
Trevor.
What was I gonna say? Thank you, all of you guys. This was a really insightful one, presentation. Matt, one of the things you mentioned was, try to find the old custom that you only have to move a couple walls in, right? And I think that what you're talking about is a very small swimming hole, right? It's not a big pool of us or looking at, you know, those projects or those client base. It's just a smaller socioeconomic class of people. But, you know, so pigtailing on that is like, that bigger pool of people are looking at tract homes, whether they're nice tracts in, you know, in Palo Alto or Willow Glen, where you do have some like variety in the tract, right? There's still tract homes. I mean,
Yeah.
I've rebuilt homes where you walk in and it was the model home and there's 4 different kinds of flooring, right? And it was kind of cool to look at, right? You know what I mean? But well, my experience and what, you know, what I'd like to ask you, John, is that if you have, and Matthew, you do your design build firm, so you get people in early in the conversation. And I think your 2-to-1 ratio is more like day 2, they woke up out of bed and said, you know, we got $500,000 to spend on this house, right? But they have no information to base that off of.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, but my point is like the earlier, I think, for me, where I've had really good experiences where it's just this great seamless process where the handoff kind of happens very early in that design stage, to start those conversations with people that are looking at numbers and estimates on a regular basis, right? Because I turned out, you know, you know, last month I turned out 20 estimates over the past 2 months, right? So that's, you know, that's a pretty substantial amount of numbers, from kitchen remodels to whole houses to new custom homes. So I think that, you know, I'm asking you, does it behoove you guys and the smoothness of the process and the sticker shock to have people in to council earlier in the process?
Yeah, we definitely do. We do that in the schematic design phase early on in the project. So when people say, how much does it cost? When we finally get to like, okay, we've talked about what they want and what they're trying to do, you know, if it's a new home, if we say, well, it could be $1,000 per square foot, right? That's the number I just heard, and that's what we say. And they say, you know, but how do I know what it's really gonna cost, right? It's like, well, that's just a guesstimate. You need to have some design done that can be measured,
Yeah.
Sure.
right? With take off, so you can see what, you know, what's involved in this project, right? And then we need to go to a builder and get them on board so they can start preparing some preliminary numbers for you early in the schematic design phase, right? So that's the best process.
Yeah, it is.
What about projects where, you know, the clients are still pretty tight-lipped, right? And not tight, sorry, they're still pretty cautious, and they don't want to share a lot of information to a bunch of knuckle-dragging builders, right? And
I resemble that,
right?
Mark.
But the point, like if we can only see what we can see from walking through the house if we're given the opportunity to walk through the house, right? And like all the stuff that's behind the walls and under the ground and all that. Like, what is your experience in kind of finding the existing condition affecting the price versus what percentage of the changes are client-based changes, right? I mean, obviously there's jurisdictional changes, but those, I think, in my experience, are small, right? So like for you two guys, what are you seeing out there? How do people best prepare for the challenges of a remodel, right? There's very few challenges in a new house, but in a remodel, I think it's pretty terrifying, right? Like, how do you address that?
I'll go first.
Yeah, well, I actually think that remodeling is a lot easier. I think it's all knowable. I mean, we typically go crawl under the house. You know, if I think I'm gonna have a foundation there, I go and I see is there plumbing, is there existing foundation, what's going on under there? I mean, I'm 60, I'm still going up in the attic and under the house, right? So go up and I map out every purlin, every rafter, I figure everything out. Also, I went to school for structural engineering, so I'm always like figuring out every little detail, how I think the engineer is gonna go for it. But I try and anticipate all those things, or if I have a 2-story, a lot of times I'll say, hey, I think there might be plumbing, there might be something here. We cut open the ceiling, we look at what's in there. I mean, I'm trying to have no change orders. I'm trying to uncover as much as possible. And this is a whole thing that I think is really important. And John and I have talked about this, like design build isn't a company, it's a mindset, right? If I'm just trying to partner with people that they have the client on board with, like, this is gonna cost money to figure this out and do it right, rather than you getting blown up later. It takes time, it takes investment, and that's, I think, very, very important and rewarding for the client, because a lot of times, like, I forget, so someone was asking about, maybe it was you, Dave, like, do they withhold? Like, a lot of the clients, you're going along and they said $1 million, and then you design it $1 million, they're like, well, that's not enough. They start adding, you're like, well, I thought the budget was, well, we had $1.5 million, but we figured if we said $1.5 million, you design. So it's like, just be honest, right? We all got to be honest. And that's part of the reason I like showing people projects and saying, I don't like to ask them what their budget is, because I just assume they're going to lie. I mean, I hate to say, once in a while we do get a client that goes like, we had one in Woodside the other day, and he's like, I know it's going to be like $1,500 to $2,000 a foot because all my neighbors have built and that's what they're spending. It's like, okay, great, we're through that. But most people either don't know, or they're afraid if they tell you, you're going to overcharge them for whatever. Which I don't think I think builders are the most honest group of people that in the world. I see my subs giving and giving and giving and giving and giving and not getting paid, even when the client's not nice to them, they're still giving. But we show the client, like, here's what it costs. So then they react to, I want to see how did they react to that's 1.5 million, rather than, hey, what's your budget? Because now I'm playing cat and mouse. Whereas when I kind of show my cards first, they can choose opt in or opt out.
Well, we're talking about new versus remodel, right? So in a new home, we like to make sure to specify everything, and we draw details, and we try to get fixed pricing ahead of time to make the project more predictable for them. Right? So there shouldn't be as many change orders, I feel like, when we have provided the specifications. And of course, there'll be some things they can't decide, and there's going to be naturally there'll be some allowances in every budget. And so our talking point to the clients on that is, would you like to know what 96% of your project's going to cost for sure? Or would you like to know what 50% of your project's going to cost for sure? And that 4% can either go up or down, or that 50% can either go up or down. Let us know which you prefer. So if they don't want to make decisions and they don't want to finalize these, then you're getting to the situation where the allowances are going to be much bigger. People are going to be faced with just rectifying allowances as the change orders can be significant. And then on a remodel project, I guess we don't really track, as the architects, what the different cost centers are for the change orders and keep any record of that. So I can't tell you. I do recall, we tell people they need to have a contingency. We usually say have a 10% contingency to pre-warn them that on a remodel project, right, you're going to need to.
Hopefully that'll cover it.
Yep, hopefully.
I've done some remodels in San Francisco downtown office building. I remember one especially, the firm that I was working for, we bought an office building, Californian Battery. Beautiful place, it wasn't historically landmarked, but it was on that ready to be registered one. We were just going through and doing major remodel. And, we had a budget, and we had a great architect. We had a Dome Construction, I think, at the time, was ready to do the work. And Tom, the architect, came through and he went, we want to do the whole second floor, completely blow it out and remodel it, and for a big tech firm that was coming in. And so Tom, I said, what's behind this wall? And he just took a hammer and bang, bang, bang. He went, yeah, just tear down the wall, just expand the footprint. There was a giant concrete stairway that went from the basement all the way up to the 4th floor. And so it wasn't, all of a sudden, the demolition wasn't just taking down the sheetrock wall, it was demoing the entire concrete stairwell that ran up the outside of the building, inside of the wall. All sorts of surprises like that were constantly blowing up as we went through the 8-story building with a penthouse on top, that, kept surprising us.
That's
like,
the risk.
so it's sometimes I thought, it's a hell of a lot easier just to build straight out of the ground than it is to do a remodel, depending on what the building is, where it is, and, so,
Anyway,
thank you for
I
listening.
was gonna ask, what kind of conversations do you have with your clients about right sizing their projects? And then
do they always end up relating back to cost? Or like they mentioned at the beginning, like a smaller footprint equals a smaller embodied carbon output. So do you ever talk about that with your clients in the beginning?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think, and clients who want a 10 or 15,000 square foot house don't come to us. So we don't have those people coming to us and try to talk them down, to a 5,000 square foot house or something. That's just not our clientele. But most of the people who want us to design new houses from the range of 3,000 to 4,000 square feet. We talk about trying to make the spaces feel bigger than they are and using efficient layout and right sizing the spaces all the time.
4,000 feet's a nice size.
That's big, it's huge.
That is.
It's massive,
You can do
it's twice as
anything
big
you
as
need
my
to do.
house.
In 4,000 square feet.
I'm just curious, like, what parameters, what would be the 3 or 4 parameters you would use to say, yeah, maybe remodel versus no?
Sorry, I
There's
missed
a great slide, actually, there's a great slide that Matt had, if you can go back to the word salad slide. Right?
Salad.
Which one?
Matt, the first one for
The
Matt,
most obnoxious one.
not Matthew.
Daily owned,
It's even more-
daily owned,
It's even more verbal than that.
daily owned.
Not Matthew, sorry.
This one, look on the left where it says remodeling and building new, I read through that summarizes it.
Is that, yeah?
It's pretty good.
So it's hard to read, I'm so
If you
sorry.
really want to change.
So a lot of times when someone has an old house, we'll hire like a soils engineer to go inspect the soils, do a floor level analysis. I mean, if that floor is moved all over the place or it's unstable, that's kind of a deal killer, right there. And I think it comes down to like, how much work are they going to do to the house, right? So that one client,
That's what I was more referring to, like.
okay.
Like, how much of the structure do you need to keep? Like, is there general parameters you have? If we're taking more than X% of the structure down, then it's better just to at least go all the way down to the foundation.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of projects where the clients, they start out with a little thing and pretty soon and that's why I kept pointing out, like, don't let the client push you around because you get to a point, I've done several homes where we take down all the walls and there's just a foundation left and then we moved all the load-bearing walls. So now the foundation's sitting there, but it's not really doing anything. And it's just frustrating to end up at that point. And a lot of times it's because my team has been too kind or whoever's the architect's been too kind and kind of went along. And then you get to that point and you're like, well, this should have just been a new house. It would have been much better. And then you tear all the walls down and then it's got 5/8 plywood subfloor or it has the old 2x6 T&G with a bunch of knots in it. And you go, well, you're gonna have a squeaky floor. Is that okay when you're spending $2 million to rebuild this house to have a squeaky floor? Because that's what we're gonna have. And then they're like, no. So now I'm putting in a new subfloor and it just, so.
I mean, I think the biggest, like, you go up to like Michigan or, where I grew up in the Midwest, right? The calculus is completely different because labor prices are so much lower, right? And so then it's like, okay, if you're getting this, it just seems like here with labor prices being so expensive, you come in with backhoe, you can take that house down in a morning, right? Versus if you're disassembling the house, just that's gonna cost a whole bunch of money, isn't it? It just seems like the minute you're doing more than a remodel, it just seems like it gets really hard to think about saving too much of the house.
Well, then you have the time factor. It's really hard. It's hard because doing a new construction can take so much more time with the entitlements and permitting. And then it's the operational cost going forward of having to just carry that loan or carry that money. So really, and everybody's calculus is different in the sense of some folks we saw some of the one of the examples that Matthew gave, kind of money's not really much of an object. And I've worked with plenty of them, but then I've also worked with plenty that I made the analysis of there is no option to rebuild, even if it makes more sense, because there's no money to get a rental.
Yeah.
And you have kids getting into school and they need to register for school in 3 months and you gotta be ready for the house. And my mom needs a place to live and I need to have a place built quickly. I'm gonna convert a garage. So it really, very quickly, you kind of take that funnel and you get small. One item spits out, and that says you just gotta remodel. You can't. So it's kind of a hard question to overall. I would think generally things like adding a basement, kind of hard to build. If you want a basement, that's hard. If you can't stand an 8-foot floor plate throughout the whole house, that's might want to rebuild it. I mean, there's a few, Matthew, are there a few, like, a cheat list of some things that are just almost guaranteed to be new builds? You know, adding a basement's one.
Yeah.
Floor plans,
Adding a second floor, a lot of times we got,
adding a second floor.
3 months ago, we got 2 projects designed by really well-known architects, and the architect wrote on there, "Don't touch the first floor." And I'm like, well, I don't know how I had a second floor and don't touch the first floor. And so they kind of use 1,000 per square foot, but only for the second floor. But I kind of had to tear down the first floor to rebuild it. So
The structural engineers know, like, they love it, they just
Hovering.
put
Yeah.
legs on it.
Yeah.
Go down,
We-
below, and put legs
Yeah.
on it.
magnets and different things to hover it.
Okay, you in the back, sorry.
Dave Lord.
Hi.
Hey, so I'm a designer, but I also was in real estate for over 8 years, and that's when I pursued my Build It Green certification. So I've always had an interest in it, and I come from a building background. So my question, Dave, I walked in a little bit late, but you were sharing some really good information about sustainable construction. And I would like to know, from a design standpoint, as I want to continue to breathe the benefits of sustainability, when we're talking about remodel versus new construction, is it just as easy with a remodel? Like, we're talking a lot about remodels here. A lot of people are doing it for all the obvious reasons. Is it just as easy to promote sustainable product in a remodel versus new construction? Or, obviously, it's a slam dunk new construction. But if you're retrofitting old and new and trying to incorporate how to save energy and steer the client in the right direction, is it, can it get more expensive? Can it get more timely? Products are not as available or more expensive to retrofit old with newer sustainable materials, like you were talking about earlier. I don't know enough about that in terms of construction, but I definitely want to help educate my clientele and support the architects I work with and the contractors, because there's a big spectrum of contractors out there, and some are on board and some are not. And I want to help however I can, but it often boils down to, and you all know it, cost. So I want to do all the right things, but I also need to have that knowledge to know, okay, yeah, you might be looking at a 10% hike in material, and it might take 3 months longer to do what we're talking about doing because we have to retrofit a remodel. So, sorry, that was a big question.
I mean, I think it pulls from each one of these talks. Like, is it easier to talk about sustainability with a remodel than a new house? Absolutely not. I think it's actually easier to have that conversation with a remodel because you're keeping so much. And John mentioned it earlier, like, part of your program is already defined, right? You have limitations on what you can do. I think you put it as essentially binders, right? You have your existing walls and your existing foundations. And obviously, one of the things that Matt brought up was kind of this whole planning and incorporation of the existing structure with the new structure. And Matthew mentioned that, you know, if we're having to have conversations about changing entire sections of the house, they're different questions. When you're remodeling, it's mostly interior finishes. And one of the things that we didn't touch upon at all, well, John touched on it a little bit, was when you are starting with an existing house and you're to remodel it, your choices for upgrading that structure to be a more efficient structure are limited, right? Like when we go to build a passive house from a remodeled house, air sealing is incredibly important. And it's so much more difficult to do on a remodel, like tenfold more different, right? More difficult. So, you know, I wish I could give you like a pat answer for all of this, and I don't think anybody can. I think that's the reason that this topic is so important, is because there's no pat answer.
Well, a lot of the remodels I do, we take it down to the studs. So we're almost starting over, but there's still a lot of tying in old and new.
Not really.
And how can we do that to the best that we can do it?
I can maybe answer that to some extent, because it sounds like a lot of what you're doing is finishes and furniture. And so,
No, I do way more than that.
no, I just mean in terms of the material that you're putting in, because Dave mentioned the red list in the beginning. And that's one of the really easy ways to vet all of the products that you're inserting into a new project, whether it's new or existing.
So
But
that's,
I work with builders on speccing everything, not
good
just
for you.
finishes.
Mm.
And furniture is the last thing I do. So I get involved with architects in the very beginning.
So last BABSC meeting we had, John spent an hour in front of everybody, and then we spent another hour walking through detailing.
Yeah.
That was one little tiny bit of what we do, right? It's, you know, John spent 2 slides on that. It makes such a difference in how these houses perform in just that one aspect. And we're not even talking about materiality of these things, right?
Right.
Like, it is a career. It is a career to get better and better. And I mentioned the red list tool that we built. Like, I've been doing this 20 years, 21 years. We just built that tool this year, and it dramatically opened my eyes. Like, there is, like, if you feel like you're not doing a good job, welcome to the family. Like, I feel like every time I learn something new, I'm like, well, all those people in the back, like, that I already finished, like, they don't get the advantage of all this stuff that I learned today. I just think you try, right? Like, we're constantly getting better. Our houses now are 10 times better than our houses were 10 years ago.
So you're saying it can be a lot more challenging on a
Absolutely.
remodel, but more expensive?
So I think that it can be more expensive. It can also be a lot cheaper. I have architects that specify closed cell foam in every one of their projects. Drives me bonkers, right? Closed cell foam, I could take that budget from the closed cell foam, spend it on air sealing, put in dense packed cellulose, not fill the cavities of the walls with a toxic chemical, be sequestering carbon and save the client money. And they get all the benefits of that materiality, right? Like, there is no perfect answer, right? There is no perfect house. There's just a better house than you did, or a better building than you did last time. Yes, sir.
Question, you had that slide that had, you know, the toxicity, the ones that they're less toxic. And I was just wondering, I was in another, you know, seminar where the architect was quite well known on this technical big role, said, hey, use mineral wool all day long because it doesn't, you know, mold, you know, it's pretty, you know, hardy. And, you know, and he wasn't a fan of cellulose at all. So I'm just wondering, when you're putting that kind of red list together, if there's any consideration that, oh, you know, let's say use mineral wool, it lasts, you know, it lasts a lot longer, you know, and causes less problems than that cellulose. And how's that kind of, you know, thing tied into the whole, life of the lifespan of the building in the embodied carbon calculation?
I mean, Matthew was saying in his 2 examples, right? One was on the cliff, and he would have done stuff differently on that house just based on its location, and it had 38 years left of its lifespan, than he would have done on a house
Fall off
in
the
another
cliff.
project, right? Like, I mean, I use different materials on our projects in Santa Cruz than we use on the ones in the Silicon Valley. Like, absolutely, because I'm worried about water, and I'm worried about soil erosion, and I'm worried about the damn gophers. Right? I mean, you know, every job is unique, and that's why we can't use canned details for, well, some people do, but I think it's a bad idea, right? I mean, what do you guys think?
Yeah, like you said, every project is different, and yeah, even looking back on that house on Opal Cliff, there are so many things that I learned. Every house that gets built is the first time it's getting built. It's a prototype, right? And so then if you're aware and paying attention, then you're gonna learn something from that, and the next time you're gonna do it different and better. For example, on that Opal Cliff project, the cliff is right here. So when it was raining last year, I'm out there one day and the rain hits the bluff, the wind hits the bluff, and it rains upward. So I'm out on her balcony and the whole ceiling of the balcony is soaking wet. 7-foot overhang and the windows, everything's wet. Like that doesn't happen in Silicon Valley. Right? So you're thinking about your waterproofing and all these different things. This is a totally different thing. So yeah, next time the materials I use will probably be a little bit different. A lot of things will be different than what I did this time, because I'm like, it's not just horizontal surfaces I'm worried about, it's every surface.
Amen to that.
Yes.
I hear
Amen.
you.
Another quick question, thank you, was if you decide, okay, you're gonna demolish the building, there's higher ceilings and lower, you wanna move it away from the cliff, say. So, I think we talked in one of our last meetings, there's some companies that do basically deconstructive. So is anybody actually deconstruct in situ and actually use the lumber from that old building and put it back into the new building, so you reduce the transportation costs, to the, recycle lumber yard and back, let's say.
I've done that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't use it for structural. You
You
can only use it for holding up sheetrock.
redwood siding. I've even had clients that pull all the redwood siding off and send it to a guy, strips it all. It's all clear redwood, it's beautiful,
Yep.
right? Dimensional lumber, redwood dimensional lumber that's like, looks like it just came out of the mill, and they want to tear this whole subfloor out, and I'm like, well,
Yeah. And it's
I'll take
purple.
that home. I have some land, I'll take it home. I have the space for it in my place even, but I have done that with non-structural materials for sure.
So the structural, you can't.
You can't reuse the structural that you demoed?
No,
You
it's
can't.
not, it's not
Dry.
graded. It's
There's a
not
structural engineer, he'll tell you.
graded.
Test it on site.
Yeah.
You can test it on site?
Yeah, but typically what happens, we have to actually clean up, but just typically what happens on site, as soon as you stick a nail in it, it explodes because it's so dry.
Yeah.
Gets brittle.
Hopefully,
Thank
Yeah, unless you want to pre-drill it. Then get your poor framer to end up drying all this.
Good to see you, brother.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, I appreciate it.